Good morning. Good morning. Great to see you this morning on this second Sunday of Advent. Have you begun your Christmas shopping yet? No. Started decorating around the house. Feeling guilty about all the things you should have done and haven't done yet? Yeah. It is that season of the year. Is the holiday season a happy time for you? That's a good question because it's not a happy time for everybody, and so on the one hand we do have this time of tremendous festivity that's ramped up by our culture and wants us to be good consumers, and then on the other hand we do have this awareness for us that oftentimes things are not the way we would like them to be. And so we balance these two things in our lives, the way that things are and the way that we would like them to be, and how we do that. And then sometimes the events tip us into one of those two choices. So I spoke with a woman this past week. And I asked her, how her Thanksgiving was, and she said, it wasn't very good because she had lost her mother just a few months ago, and so for her, Thanksgiving was just not. It just couldn't be the same, and so she spent her Thanksgiving alone at home, really not wanting to be with anybody else. And then she said, and I'm really dreading Christmas. So dreading Christmas. I mean, can you imagine? But for some folks, the festivity and all of that gives way to this deeper pain and reality. And for some, their circumstances throw them in that direction. But, for all of us to some extent, life is not the way we would like it to be. So if we were honest with ourselves, we would be willing to say that there are things that we wish were different than they are. And so the temptation is to allow the kind of the whitewater rapids of Christmas and the holidays just kind of to take us, past it all. Fortunately, the spiritual tradition of the church and the gift that has been given to us in the Christian gospel it helps us at a time when we might easily be swept away into the bright lights and the frenetic activity of our time. As much as we enjoy that, I mean, it's a great thing to be able to enjoy going Christmas shopping and giving presents and anticipating all of that thing, baking and decorating the Christmas. I mean, all of those are wonderful things. It's all great, but there is also this little thing called our soul. Our soul, that, our souls are they're so polite. They will allow everything and anyone to overtalk them. They speak very gently and quietly. And so it's easy for us just to kind of override it, to listen to other voices, to allow the voice of our souls to get kind of drowned out in all of the stuff that's going on. And so it would be very difficult sometimes to find a space to actually quiet down enough to hear that voice. That's why this season of the year in the church has to do with the desert. Do you like the desert? I mean, so a lot of people go to the desert out west, right? So you go out Arizona. There's some wonderful communities out there. You know, because they pump in water from all over the place, right? So there are these oases in the desert. That doesn't count. That's not the desert, right? That is not the desert. No, the desert is hot and sandy. The sun bakes you. There are lizards and snakes and scorpions, and there are no porta potties, right? There's nothing there. And so who wants to go to the desert, to that kind of a desert? Who wants to go? Nobody. Nobody wants to go to the desert. You want to get through the desert, or you want to, pump a bunch of water out there so you can have a nice golf course to play, right? Well, you don't choose in general to go to the desert. You're flung into the desert. You're flung there, oftentimes by circumstances, by the things that we wish weren't true, and yet are true, and we hate it, and yet we're there. And it's not really an accident for us that the desert is a place for spiritual formation. It is a place where all of a sudden we are forced, because all of the other voices are stilled, and all we hear is wind and the blowing of sand. That's all we hear. And now all of a sudden, this voice inside of us, this very polite and gentle voice that tells us that really we're scared, or that we're disappointed, or that we really don't know what is going to become of us. It's not an accident that the great leaders of the Old Testament and the New found their nurture in the desert. So it was in the desert that Jacob ran from his brother Esau after having stolen his birthright, trying to deny it all. And then all of a sudden he's going to meet up with his brother Esau, and there was going to be a battle royale. And so that night, Jacob sent his family and all of the stuff that he'd gained, he sent them away to prepare. And then in that night, alone in the desert, Jacob wrestled with the angel. And he left with a limp, remember? But he was a different man. His name got changed to Israel. Israel, one who wrestles with God. And Moses, Moses, who was going to be this political revolutionary, bring about freedom for the Hebrews in Egyptian captivity. And so he decided to do it in his own way, and he ended up murdering an Egyptian and fled out into the desert, right? And for 40 years was there until he saw that bush that was on fire, and he met God. And then he went back and led the children of Israel, children of Israel out of slavery and bondage to the promised land. It's not very far from Egypt to the promised land. It's not a long journey. And so they got there to the edge of the promised land, and God said, "Go take it. It's yours. It's yours for the taking. Go take it." And they said, "There are giants in those hills. They're bigger than we are and meaner than we are." And so for fear, for overwhelming fear, they balked. And so for 40 years, they wandered. Where? In the desert. They weren't ready for the promised land. They weren't ready yet. They had to bake in the desert. So we do get flung into the desert. Without asking, without wanting it, we get thrown out there. And we do our best. Or we can embrace the desert. We can embrace it. John the Baptist embraced the desert. John the Baptist was a guy who was out there in the desert, and he had nothing. I don't know what it felt like to wear camel hair, but I think it's probably not very comfortable, huh? Eating locusts and wild honey. I mean, got nothing. But when this man spoke, kings quaked. And people left the cities and came out to the desert to hear him. And he pointed to one who was to come. John embraced the desert as a place to be able to hear not only our own voice of fear, but also the voice of God. Until we hear and really understand our voice of fear and confusion and doubt and despair, until we really hear it, we cannot hear the voice of God, who comes to provide for us and care for us. And so the invitation is, in this season of Advent, to prepare ourselves for the coming King by embracing the desert, finding places of quiet and solitude. Now, solitude isn't just being alone. I mean, there are some. I remember that I was going to do a men's retreat, and there was a guy who lived alone. And I said we were going to do some solitude. And he said, why in the world do I want to come so that I can be all by myself? Again, I'm always by myself. It's different. Solitude's not just being alone. Solitude is listening. You can be in a crowd and lonely. And you can be by yourself and be lonely. Or you can be in a crowd or by yourself and experience solitude, a sense of centeredness in your soul, knowing who you are and where God is. The Russian spiritual writers have a word for it. They call it pustynia. It's the Russian word for desert. And they say that you have to embrace the desert. So to embrace the desert could be a shack out in the middle of the woods, or it could be a little garden that you design for yourself that's just allows you to get away from everything else, or it can be in your own mind, but a place of listening. In his book, The Desert in the City, Carlo Corretto writes, "The desert is the place where we gather courage, where we pronounce words of truth, remembering that God is truth. The desert is the place where we purify ourselves and prepare ourselves to act as if touched by the burning coal that was placed by the angel on the lips of the prophet." This opportunity that we can lose so easily and quickly to be able to center ourselves and connect with the voice within us to the voice of our Creator and the one who gives us life. Because what happens in the desert when the God of creation comes is really remarkable. Jesus went into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, into the desert to be tempted, led by the Spirit, into the desert to be tempted, and was victorious on our behalf. He went into the desert to do a battle with the dark one that we could not ourselves do. And he was victorious. And he plants there in the desert life and beauty and love, grace and mercy. When we go to the desert and we encounter the living God, we discover not sand, but life. Do you know what's your favorite Christmas hymn? Favorite Christmas carol? I was thinking of them this past week, and this one came to mind. Lo, how a rose ere blooming from tender stem hath sprung. The last verse of that hymn. O flower whose fragrance tender with sweetness fills the air, dispel in glorious splendor the darkness everywhere. True man, yet very God, from sin and death now save us, and share our every load. Coming in the desert, a rose with a fragrance and color and beauty. But that's only the first. A garden, Isaiah tells us, a garden in the desert that comes from the life that he plants within us and fosters its seeds growth. We're in the season of Advent. And for us, the season of Advent is a time of preparation. It's a time to go to the desert, to open our hearts, to hear the voice, the starving voice inside of us, and to connect it with a God who loves us. It would be very easy in this culture of ours to get swept away by the raging river of commercialism and all of the stuff that goes with it. And it's all fun and it's all good. But you can't really celebrate the joy of Christmas until you know what you're celebrating. You can't really know what it's like to see beauty until you've been honest about what daily life is really like for us and how much we yearn for his tenderness and his love. The season of Advent, it's a time to prepare, a time to draw aside, a time to be blessed, and to see Jesus do miracles. Amen. So let's stand together and affirm the faith of our hearts and of our lives by using the form of the Nicene Creed on page 358.